Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this episode of the Qarawiyyin Podcast. This is your host Sara and I'm joined by my two co-hosts Aisha H and Aisha A. And before we get started with this episode, we did want to mention, because of the events going on currently in Sudan that have been following protests that have been going on for a couple of months, there have just been the violence has escalated in the past few weeks. So we wanted to mention that there is a fundraiser available to send emergency medical aid into Sudan. So we're going to link that in the description. We really encourage people, if not to donate, to at least share it, to spread the word, and try to get informed about the situation, inshallah. But today's episode, we actually have our very first guest episode, alhamdulillah, and it's a really exciting one. So today we're joined by Ilham Ibrahim, and she's the founder of Qurtuba Online. By profession, she's a surgical nurse, and she's also an avid reader, a martial arts enthusiast, and she enjoys studying history and the sacred sciences. So welcome, Ilham. How are you doing?
Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing very well. Thank you, ladies, for inviting me on.
Awesome to have you, alhamdulillah. And how are my co-hosts doing? I didn't ask y'all.
We're good. Yeah, alhamdulillah, we're good. Just, really excited to have Ilham on, alhamdulillah. And it's so nice to have another sister sort of our age range who's also so dedicated to talking about some of the topics that we enjoy speaking about as well, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, mashallah. Found a kindred spirit, of which I'm sure there are loads, but it's great to find somebody.
Yeah, for real. Alhamdulillah. And actually, on the subject of like similar topics that we hope to discuss, Ilham did write an article for us on individualism and the destruction of community. Before we get specifically to that topic, Ilham, I wanted to ask you about when you started Qurtuba Online. What was the thought process behind it? What were your goals with it, and the type of topics that you hope to address by starting it?
So, Bismillah. So Qurtuba Online was actually wasn't the original project that I actually had started. It was actually a company me and my sisters founded. It was Qurtuba Publishing House. So essentially it was a platform whose aim was to create spaces for Muslims to discuss issues that were pertinent to them. Essentially we wanted to give a voice to Muslim writers on a variety of topics. The idea actually came from a really funny story, but sad at the same time. My sister and I were we were Googling on Amazon for some Islamic books. So just literally went on Amazon.com and put the word Islam into the spacebar and just searched it. We didn't put any filters on it, whatnot. And subhanAllah, the first 10, top 10, maybe 15 books that showed up were actually books with very strong anti-Islamic sentiments and were written by people who are known to be people who are very, I don't like the word Islamophobe, but like, you know what I mean. They're people who are very much have shown their opposition to Islam. So essentially that's what we did. We decided, why don't we start online publishing and start giving Muslims the ratings? And basically our goal was to knock out all these books out of the top 15 and, put Muslim books into the top 15. Actually, Muslim writers, Muslim topics, Muslim opinions, right? Instead of some random guy from the South that says he's an expert in Islam. So basically, we began working on it, and subhanAllah, it sounded really good on paper. I'll be very honest with you. The project sounded really great on paper, but unfortunately, a lot of the book proposals we were getting were not essentially the best quality writing. And also, one of the things we noticed, and this is kind of my own personal observation, a lot of the issues that the Muslims were writing about were not necessarily addressing the issues, but they're more is talking about symptoms rather than the actual issue themselves. And a lot of them were just tangents, right? And I noticed a common thread amongst a lot of the submissions we received that a vast majority of the proposals were centered around deconstructing the opposition's argument rather than building our own. So it started to make me question, like, subhanAllah, we're always like on the defensive as Muslims. And I started to ask myself, okay, is this really contributing anything really to our discussion if we're just constantly, breaking everything down rather than building things up? So again, like I said, the whole thing started to fall apart a little bit for that reason, I began to slowly lose motivation to work on it, because I saw the substance of the work that I initially had envisioned was starting to slowly dissipate. There were a couple of other things that happened. I don't want to go too much into it, but in and around the same time, I had a very personal incident that happened to me. One of my close friends and fellow Quran student, we studied the Quran together. It was around 2016. So Qurtuba Publishing House launched in 2015. I worked on it for about a year, and then around 2016, this friend of mine, she was tragically taken from us, and it completely shook my world at the time. So she was just shy of 30 years old. Subhanallah, she was a hafidha. She had memorized the Quran, and she was teaching at a Quran academy. She was a beautiful, beautiful soul. And at the time, I began to ask myself a lot of questions that had never really occurred to my conscious mind before. Like, what's the purpose of my existence, and why God put me here? What am I meant to do with my life? I started to question just the fragility of my life in general. And I thought to myself, well, God took her from us before 30 years old. I can very well pass away before I'm 30 as well. I can very well die tomorrow. And I thought to myself, subhanAllah, I have an account to answer to God as well. And if I was to stand before him, could I honestly answer that, can I honestly show what I've worked for this life? Will I have anything to show him? And the answer terrified me. It was very clearly no. So what I did is with the project, Qurtuba Publishing House, after all that, I shut the entire thing down. I took down the website, I took down the social media, and I began to forge my own path to really understanding myself, self-development, and really trying to get a better connection with Allah. And subhanAllah, around the same time, in Allah's wisdom, I was introduced to what we call, quote-unquote, traditional Islam. So a lot of those scholars started to really influence my understanding of my own faith, my own religion. And before that, I actually looked, and I think this is probably going to tie into the discussion we'll have a bit later, but I used to see Islam more as an algorithm. Do you know what I mean? Like just an algorithm to my salvation. Here's the ABCs to get to Jannah. And I never saw Islam as anything more than that. But the more I began to learn about Islam, I started to see Islam as more of a state of being and, a mode of thinking. The more I studied, I began to enroll myself into like fiqh classes and basic aqidah classes. Shout out to my Shafi'is. But subhanAllah, I started studying more and more, and I just started getting to the realization that I had certain cognitive frameworks that were informing my way of thinking and my way of acting, and I had no idea where these frameworks came from, and I had no idea who they came from. And that it really occurred to me that a vast majority of Muslims, including myself, we've imbibed a worldview that's foreign to the Islamic paradigm. And even though a vast majority of it may cross over and very well, not have any contention, there are points of contention, but we're not recognizing them, right? So yeah, for me, unfortunately, it was more of like a secular liberal framework. I would have said maybe 5 years ago, I was like not a hardcore liberal, but someone who would very much align with liberal thoughts. And I was someone who openly would say I was a feminist and things like that. But I would say in the past 5-6 years, the progression has changed a lot. And a lot of it had to do with recentering my faith. Do you know what I mean? So long story short, that's where Qurtuba Online came from. After I had studied more about my religion, I kind of backed down and, forged that path and trying to recenter myself and trying to really do some self-inventory where I stand with God. Basically, Qurtuba came out as a platform for young Muslims who wish to engage in like critical thinking and discussion on serious contemporary issues in light of Islamic frameworks. So that's basically where Qurtuba kind of came along. It's 2019, so it's been about like a 4-year process to get here.
MashaAllah. Man, I want to just stand up and clap. That was, mashallah, that was really, just the intro was inspiring.
SubhanAllah. Yeah. I was thinking about this when I saw the question. I was like, wow, this is not going to be like a straightforward answer.
No, and
that process never is, I think. So like reaching that point is like, it's not straightforward. It can be like really convoluted, but yeah.
And I think, I was just going to say the insight, subhanAllah, is what I'm really like, what's the word? Not vibing, but what's really hitting me. It's not like it's not your cookie cutter. Oh, I thought this was a great idea, and alhamdulillah, it was all spring and easy, and because life isn't like that, and thought processes aren't like that. And subhanAllah, the growth that I can hear, mashallah, that you've gone through is just really, it's really something everyone can learn from, I think.
Yeah, I think mashallah as well, the fact that you combined both elements of, I want to, do something and contribute and tackle a problem that you identified in terms of people's perceptions of Islam and you wanting to fix that, combined with your own sort of recognition that ultimately what is our purpose in this life? It isn't just an algorithm. That spiritual development needs to happen. I think, subhanAllah, that's just such a lesson for all of us, because sometimes we can get waylaid by one, but it's so important for us to really combine both in order for us to be successful, inshallah. That when we leave, we do leave a legacy in both realms, not just one.
No, for real. Also, like, the whole time you were talking, I was like, dang, these sound like the conversations that we have, like, all the time. We're just like another thing is that, like, when you mentioned the kind of submissions that you guys were getting when you were trying to, like, have the publishing house and stuff, and that's just another, like, conversation that I feel like the Muslim community should have more, which is, like, it's not just that we seek representation or, like, really, like, popular works or, like, big names, like, big platforms and stuff, but the quality of the work is lacking so often.
It is.
And it's the same, like, like, contrived, repetitive stuff that makes it, because oftentimes it's palatable not to Muslims or beneficial to Muslims, but because it's palatable to, like, non-Muslim audiences, the typical, like, I don't know, freaking hijab struggle or you know what I mean, like, like the minority struggles in the West and stuff like that.
A lot of them were very much like, why Islam condones this, why Islam condones that, why
apologetics,
Muslim women aren't oppressed. Like, I'm like, come on, guys, generics, really? Like, let's move something. Let's get deeper. Let's have some substance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And subhanAllah, there's a lot of people in our community, our teachers, that are unfortunately not very supported. There are voices, but they don't have the means. So we need to look at ourselves. It's not necessarily that we need to start getting more people on board into creating content creators. Maybe we should look in our community and see who's of substance and who has the merits to take that on and support them.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of talking about moving away from, like, reactionary rhetoric and more of the topics that we should be discussing as a community, what are some of the things that, like, specifically with Qurtuba Online, were there specific topics that you like really wanted to focus on, or like a realm of topics, or was it just like, because you were mentioning things about like the Islamic worldview, which, like, I connected with a lot, and that, like, reaching a point where we can talk about these things, it was not just like, you don't, like, address things, like, issue by issue, like, okay, how do we apologize for this? How do we justify this, like, Sharia point in Islam? But, like, first establishing the Islamic worldview, and then building on top of that. But, I want to understand more, like, what your, like, vision was with Qurtuba.
So, I came to realize that a vast majority of the issues we discuss as Muslims and the manner in which we approach the issue, like I said, is a symptom to a greater pathology in our community. We're talking about young Muslims leaving Islam, or the ex-Muslim community, or we're talking about the Muslim political alignment with the liberal left, or Muslims aligning with the far right, or, like, just issues within our families, our marriages, dysfunctional families, drug, alcohol abuse. A lot of the times we're talking about homosexuality. A lot of the times we're talking about feminism. A lot of the times we're talking about Muslim women in the fashion industry and representation. But to be very honest, and this is my own personal opinion, that a lot of these issues are inextricably connected to a crisis in faith and a crisis of knowledge, and it's resulting in these issues that seem like it's an issue of identity. But reality, for me, it's an issue. It's not necessarily an issue of identity. It's a crisis of our faith and a crisis of knowledge, the lack thereof. And unless and until we start actually discussing that, we can keep talking all we want on Twitter until the cows come home about all our problems, but it will be completely devoid of any real substance or any real progression to a constructive solution. So that's the idea behind Qurtuba, is trying to really bring it back to what it needs to be brought back to, which is we need to have a better understanding, a foundation in our faith. We need to understand what our aqidah is, and aqidah meaning like our creed, but also as a worldview, as understanding that, Islam, up until about 200 years ago, this Muslim world used to have institutions and scholars who actually took care of most of this stuff for the Muslim world. Do you know what I mean? But now, into the intellectual progression in our community has probably stopped for about past 200 years. And I feel like at the same time, a lot of Muslims were very intellectually immature when it comes to our religion. So that's why it's very easy for us to find frameworks that are outside of Islam and grab onto those because of popular culture or whatnot, and use that as a mode of thinking or a way of informing our way of thinking and informing our action. So the idea of sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, you raised an interesting point about identity versus faith, and how it's a crisis not of identity but of faith. I was just wondering, where do you draw the line between the two? Because I suppose some would argue that, me being a Muslim, which is obviously inextricably linked to my faith, is inextricably linked to my identity of who I am and how I carry myself out in the world.
I wouldn't necessarily separate the two. I really do think that they're almost one and the same. However, I think the faith is what informs the identity. This is my own personal interpretation. I could very well be wrong, or there can be many other understandings and opinions to it. But for me, if there's a solidified or a grounding or a foundation in Islam, in our faith and our deen, then that's when a strength in identity and a sort of a nuanced understanding in our identity comes about. And this is, again, like I said, from my own personal experience, where I was, I guess I wouldn't say 5-6 years ago I was as confident about myself. I wouldn't say 5-6 years ago I was able to speak about my ideas the way I'm speaking about them now. And a lot of it has to do with finding some grounding, something unchanging in my faith. And knowing that Islam, if I'm a Muslim, I've submitted myself to Islam. I've accepted that Islam is the truth. If you follow a religion and you don't think it's the truth, that's another discussion, right? But if I've accepted Islam being as the truth to me, so if that is my foundation, then if I ground myself in that, then for me that's where the roots grow. That's where the identity comes along.
Yeah. Gotcha. And if I can jump in, because while you were talking, I was thinking about my own journey, and I do see it as kind of a journey of moving away from seeing Islam as my identity to seeing it as my worldview, and the true meaning of deen. And I think before, it was I had kind of a basic understanding and belief in Islam, but when I understood it as my identity, it would be mostly trying to justify my existence, and just justifying my my own ability to exist in mixed spaces and be you have your thing, I have my thing, and we can coexist. And I didn't understand it though as just an equal identity compared to others. Now I think moving away from and also what happens when you do just understand it as one identity among many is that you instead of trying to justify it as truth by having that worldview as a foundation, what I found myself doing at least was just coming across these points in related to women's issues or stuff that's controversial, and being trying to justify it and then finding those really convenient interpretations, oh, that hadith, actually the interpretation of it was this really specific situation that makes it look like the Prophet ﷺ was a huge feminist, and it's I don't know, random faqih came up with these apologetic interpretations, and I would just find those convenient interpretations and then be okay, now I can reconcile it with and Islam is fine now, but it was that there was that struggle and kind of a tug of war of trying to justify those things. But then again, when I started just studying Aqidah more and solidifying my iman and belief in Islam as a source of truth and not just one religion among many, then I was able to establish okay, regardless of my own moral inclinations, which are formed by all types of cultural influences and whatever, growing up in the US,
It's less Islam being on trial and more you trying to question yourself.
Yeah, no, basically, like, I came to the point where I was like, okay, Tawheed is true, the Quran is true, and, like, even if I don't understand this thing now, it's true, and, like, I'll understand it eventually, if I seek knowledge long enough. There wasn't this, like, kind of, I feel like there was always, like, a little bit of nervousness about, like, what if Islam is actually misogynistic, you know? But now it's like, God created me. If God, like, decides that this thing is like right for women and this thing is right for men, then it's good and it's the best thing, it's the most moral thing. And like my own ideas about like what counts as like misogynistic or like unequal or whatever, like that is secondary, and that's informed by like, you know, possibly like a worldview separate from Islam. Anyway, really convoluted way of saying like I hella relate to you. Yeah, moving on from like because I think that the article you wrote for us was kind of like, it was a good way of approaching this, at least trying to like tackle an issue from the perspective of like understanding Islam as a worldview first. So if you do want to, like, for folks who maybe haven't read the article yet, and we'll link it in the description, kind of give us like a brief summary and also like why you wrote it, like what you hope people to take away from it, first and foremost.
Yeah, mashallah, you guys have, first of all, the Qarawiyyin Project has probably, I think, is one of the best platforms out there right now. I'm just going to just hype you guys up a little bit. I'm not trying to blow up your ego, but I genuinely think you guys have, what you're doing, you got something right. You're doing some really good work. And the topic, essentially, it's something, to be very honest with you, you can probably write a whole dissertation on it. I found it very difficult to keep it within, you know, a certain word limit. But basically the topic is, the article begins with a very brief like overview of the origins of the concept of individualism and how it evolved into the modern context. So individualism, just for anyone who doesn't know, individualism is it's a concept that comes from classical liberalism and sort of evolved more later on in the late 1800s, early 1900s, by more new liberalist thinkers, especially John Stuart Mill. He's like the father of modern liberalism. So essentially, the argument I propose in the article is that the ideals of liberal theory, in particular the excessive veneration of individual autonomy, which is what individualism is, actually has backfired on the West and in secular society in its pursuit of trying to create a progressive society. And I started to support these claims with statistics. You know, you can look into the article. I've provided statistics regarding the increase of loneliness. This is actual, you know, social phenomena that's going on, that's completely new and really isolated. I would think it's isolated to the West and Europe in the sort of the modern era. The increasing levels of depression, anxiety, other social disorders, the effects it's had on children, the increasing rates of depression, anxiety, social disorders, and suicide amongst children. Unfortunately, we're seeing in this day and age 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds taking their life, which is, we really need to ask ourselves, where is this coming from? I also start to elaborate essentially on the breakdown of the family unit, how statistically women are less and less inclined to have children or have families, which is, again, an interesting phenomena. It's actually only recently increased from about the 1970s until now. So I continue to go on to predicate that the liberal philosophy of predicating an entire discourse on emphasizing the rights of individuals over the rights of the collective, for me, the argument was it's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for the disintegration of the cohesion of society. And then I contrast it with the Islamic perspective, or the Islamic position, where liberalism makes a claim, essentially, that the individual is the lord and master over himself and his property, or herself and her property. And essentially what it's saying is that if you are the lord and master over yourself and your own property, that means no one is entitled to infringe or tell you what to do. And you are allowed to do whatever you so please, insofar that you don't infringe on the rights of other people. Now, liberalism says that is the recipe to true freedom. And essentially, true freedom is the path to true self-discovery and happiness. That is in a nutshell what the liberal claim is, the claim of individualism. Whereas in the Islamic perspective, I sort of contrast it and say, well, modernity has this very agonizing struggle to understand the concept of the self. So how does it come off predicating what brings the self happiness or what brings true happiness and freedom if they can't really even understand the concept of the self or develop a coherent explanation of consciousness? And that leaves us in a really serious predicament. And like, again, the statistics presented kind of shows how individualism has actually had a very paradoxical effect on society. And I can also even, I didn't include this in the article, but I can even elaborate, in my own clinical practice. I work as a nurse in surgery, and it's incredible. It's very heartbreaking to see some of the things that, I can directly link it to this idea of individualism. For example, I've had many family members I've had many patients who've actually, elderly patients, it's unbelievable, but elderly patients who have actually died alone on my floor. And it's because their family doesn't care. They have family, but their family didn't care to make the trip to them. So this is kind of just sort of the whole idea of the article and how it's actually attempted very poorly, but I attempted to try and break it down, inshallah, to show what individualism is and how it's led to where we are today.
Yeah, mashallah. I mean, when I read your article and when Aisha told me we were going to get you on the show today, I'll be honest, I didn't remember your name, but I remember the article so clearly in my head, which, mashallah, I mean, what greater compliment, right? It's about ideas, not people.
Of course, no, that's a great compliment.
But moving on to what you were actually saying, I mean, there was this one specific, so in my personal life, I also work as a medical doctor in my spare time. And one line that really stood out for me in the article, because I see it just like you do in your practice day in, day out, and it breaks my heart. But you said a hyper-individualistic culture that hails the rights, needs and goals of the individual as far superior to that of the collective leaves the most vulnerable of society, in particular the elderly and children, exposed to physical and psychological neglect. And now another thing that you mentioned in your article was how the UK is for the first time, following the death of Joe Cox, who is one of our MPs here, has set up a Minister of Loneliness. I mean, that just sort of says it all about how terrible things have got. And, in the government article, they've mentioned statistics about how 3/4 of GPs that they surveyed said that between 1 and 5 people per day that they were seeing are suffering from loneliness. There are old people, and I've seen this personally and anecdotally as well, about how old people come into the GP with some made up, symptom that they're experiencing, just so that they've got someone to speak to, just so that once a week they can speak to a human person, and they're going to bring in apparently something called social prescribing, where your GP can say, oh, look, go to a cookery class or go to a, social outing, that sort of thing.
That's insane.
But it's ridiculous. And I mean,
that's like some Brave New World episode.
It's literally, I mean, it's like and the thing is, what's worse is call me a cynic, but I know this isn't going to last. Because I've actually been to those centres. I've been to countless, Age UK, elderly, day recreational centres, other sorts of care facilities that people, like these outreach stuff that they have in the community. And one by one, they're all being shut down because we don't have the social funding for it. It doesn't make enough of an economic impact to justify why we're spending money on these things. And so one by one, these services are just getting cut. And then, like you were saying, you get countless numbers of people in the hospital. So, for example, in the UK, we've got we've got like really vestiges of a failing, struggling social care system, of how if a person has just had pneumonia, for example, they're really terribly ill, they're in hospital, they can't go home because they're too weak to make themselves a cup of tea or a breakfast or whatever. So you make sure they've got somebody who can come in and make them meals 3 times a day or that sort of thing. We have whole wards of like 20-40 beds, filled with old people. There's nothing medically wrong with them. They're fine. But they can't leave hospital because there's no one to take care of them. It's not safe.
I think the model in the UK, the NHS, is actually very similar to the model here in Canada. It's so So I can agree, especially here in Canada, there is a huge, I can only speak specifically about Ontario. I can't speak about the rest of the provinces, but there is a huge strain on the entire system. Like medical, there's a huge medical and social strain. Like I said,
Definitely.
like you just said, Aisha, there is like in the hospital that I work in, there's probably a couple, like thousands plus beds or something like that, and there are units over, like wards after wards after wards of elderly people who just can't cope. But unfortunately, the system is so overwhelmed that there is nowhere to put these people, and then they end up getting worse and sick. And it's unfortunate. Just recently, actually, just a couple of days ago, I was speaking to one of the residents, the doctors there, and she told me that they just treated an elderly man who tried to commit suicide in his retirement home. His wife had just passed away recently, and his children had put him in the retirement home, and he went into some severe depression, and he had no reason to live anymore after 60 plus years of marriage. He lost his companion. And this is the reality we're coming to. Why are his family putting him there? Why are his children not supporting them traditionally, and not just in Muslim societies, but even in the West? Generations of family lived under one household. And there was a series, like, it wasn't just because out of economic convenience only, but it was because there was wisdom in that. We're having the, extended and immediate and extended family relations within a community together did something for the individual spiritually, mentally, psychologically. It provided them with a sense of peace, and it fulfilled this yearning that naturally we have as human beings to have social connections. But now we live in a world where we're cutting off those social connections in the name of, I want to fulfill my own individualistic goals, and my own needs need to be met before anybody else's. So it's really sad, honestly. Just doing this research, it really just kind of bring it all together. Yeah,
that's so interesting, because specifically talking about like medicine and psychology, I recall sitting in like a discussion group with a bunch of Muslim college students, and we were looking at like some statistics from like a survey that was done of like the same demographic, and there were some questions asked about mental health and psychology, and one of the questions was about like, if when you experience emotional distress, who do you go to? And the different options were like family, like imam, or like a professional, and like there was like a couple of different options, and a very big portion of the respondents, maybe like 30% or something, said family. And when people were like sharing their reflections on that, they were like, oh, that's really not good. People should definitely be seeking out professionals, and like,
really?
Blah, blah, blah. No, dude, the thing is, I was confused, because I was like, wait, no, this is good. Like, that's a good thing. That's what, right, like a role that family is supposed to serve in the first place. And that's what we see a lot with, just like, like the traditional family structure and like community in general breaking down, is that like more and more of these things are outsourced to the state or to like paid services, freaking capitalism. But like, it was weird to like hear, and that's the thing, like I shared that reflection. I was like, yeah, no, I think that's a role that family should play, that like they're supposed to be there as your emotional support. And there's obviously like varying levels of like emotional support. There's like emotional distress, and then there's like clinical like issues
psychotic
that require
nobody's saying if they're trying to kill you or themselves to just like speak to your mom about it. I mean, to be honest, that would probably help,
yeah, no, but like there's at least an understanding that like your family should serve a role in like, I don't know, in that area. But then somebody else also mentioned that actually, like, you have to be careful to not like burden other people with your problems, and that you should be considerate of other people. And I was like, no, actually, we should, like, people should carry each other's burdens. Like, exactly. I was like, people should, like, pay for each other's like living expense. Like this is what community is, and this is what family is. It's like you struggle for each other, you sacrifice for each other. But when you have this understanding of like the individual as like the primary unit, and like as like, like that source of like freedom and liberty and like self-determination, then like you're focused on the individual, and you understand other people as individuals too. You're like, well, if I ask them for something, then I'm infringing on their individual freedom and liberty.
Yeah, I think it's just so true in terms of how the devaluation of family actually plays into what Aisha and Ilham have just been talking about, because the emphasis on individualism is even separate from your family. And I mean, I know as well, like, it's a kind of a thing, especially among Muslim girls, but, you know, we kind of always talk about how, oh, you know, even when we're, you know, in our 20s, when girls aren't married, your parents are always still, you know, where are you going? You have to live at home, you know, people have restrictions in terms of travel and where they can live and what they do. But subhanAllah, the blessing of that, when you do look at other people in society and other families, particularly in the West, where from the moment children turn 18, they're like, you're adults now, you have to pay board if you live at home, or you have to just get out and find a job and find your own flat and live alone from such a young age. And even though, you know, okay, people would say cutting off, you know, financial assistance doesn't mean that you cut off that emotional attachment, but there is this kind of understanding and expectation that you're an adult now, deal with your own problems. It shouldn't be that you have to come running to your family. But why do we even frame it as running to your family when they're supposed to be there to give you that kind of support? But I think the scary thing for me is that this isn't actually the end result. What Aisha and Ilham are talking about in terms of hospitals being filled with elderly people who are dying alone because no family want to look after them, that's not, as terrible as that is in and of itself, that's not the end point here. I think if you want a rough idea of what kind of future this kind of mentality could lead to, you only have to look to several East Asian nations like Japan and South Korea at the moment, where societies are experiencing an epidemic of loneliness. I mean, it's in these countries where the phenomena of people watching each other eat online because they were seeking some kind of companionship during meals first arose. And now we are also seeing birth rates rapidly falling because people are choosing to delay marriage indefinitely. Some figures have put the shrinkage, at least in Japan, to 1,000 people a day. That's how much the population is shrinking. And this has much wider demographic impacts on the economy and on social life. Some towns in Japan are now actually resorting to paying couples to get married in a bid to hold off this kind of imminent population crisis. Now, obviously, part of this trend is the economic insecurity that young people increasingly feel, even in the developed world. But it's also because family is viewed as a burden and a responsibility. There's a very utilitarian approach in place here that ultimately sees children as not having children, as not giving sufficient benefit to warrant having them in the first place, because they ultimately interfere with that individualistic approach to life. And people are even turning away from marriage or long-term dating for the same reason, because they see it as too much of a commitment. And if one does want temporary companionship, then there are plenty of options a secular liberal framework can give you to fulfill that particular need. But you'll see this argument increasingly amongst millennials in Europe and North America as well. So I think that ultimately our social and economic framework is going to be drastically impacted by these trends. And really, I just don't think our civilization is prepared for the coming fallout, and we don't have any tools to deal with this.
Yeah, you know, to bring it back to like talking about Islam as a worldview, because I do think it's connected in that like individualism and like destruction of family is a symptom of a deeper, like a root issue. And I think it is tied to theology because Ilham, you were mentioning like some liberal thinkers and how they talk about like the individual, like ideas about liberty and stuff. And I remember like learning about these learning about their theories in university. And they don't stop at, you know, just talking about individualism or liberty or the ideal state structure, but they have to justify that with almost like a origin story. And this is where the whole like idea of the state of nature comes in. And like a few different like liberal theorists have different conceptions of it, but basically it's how they explain how human beings came into how they started building states. And they have this idea that like, okay, first there was a state of nature, there was no, you know, like private property, there was no state, and then people decided that the best way to protect their private property was to enter into like contractual relations with other human beings and blah blah blah. And in some of their like theories, they do kind of mention how like the state of nature was first like created by God, or others like they're also their way of removing God from the picture by saying that like, no, this is just like how human beings went from being like, you know, these like evolved animals to then organizing themselves into societies. And I remember like learning about this in class and the teacher, like our professor being like, by the way, yeah, like God doesn't exist. This whole state of nature thing doesn't either. And I was like, whoa, like where does like the theology come into this? But now I'm seeing that like theology does play a huge role in this. But I want you guys to expand on that. How do you think Islam does kind of provide an alternative to this by like looking at Like when we start with just like looking at Islam as a worldview from this basic like theological or aqidah standpoint, how does it then provide an alternative for us in terms of thinking about individualism and community and family?
Mm-hmm. So I kind of elaborated this in the article. This idea, I guess it's sort of like a modern liberal idea, but there is a denial of the self, like an actual denial of human nature. And that is actually probably one of the root issues that has caused this discourse to go on for so long, but it's starting to come to a standstill when they're recognizing you can only go so far denying human nature while trying to shape human nature at the same time. Islam has, in Islamic understanding, from what my teachers have taught me, is that we have a conception of human nature, our fitra, basically our innate disposition, that people like to say our soul is a Muslim sort of thing, but the reality is a better understanding of it is that it's a state where our soul has the ability to recognize self-evident truths, things that don't necessarily require evidence for it to be true. And one of the things that is self-evident truths is recognition of a creator, of a God, of someone who is our master over all of us. And in Islam, what we understand is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put us on this earth to be essentially his vicegerents, to be people on this earth who bring goodness and truth and establish justice and order in line with divine and heavenly order, essentially. So with that conception of human nature and that conception of understanding why humans are here and what our purpose is, then it becomes easier for us to sort of understand the trajectory of human civilization's human existence, sort of. So, like, in contrast to modernity, Islamic metaphysical tradition doesn't deny the human nature. And what it does, it delineates a path for men and women to recognize the positive impulses and the negative impulses in us and how to basically temper the latter, basically tempering that which would bring destruction and disorder and transgression, and sort of elevating the former, the good qualities in us that would bring goodness to ourselves and to our communities. But one thing I also, and this was kind of my own personal opinion, but I felt that the sort of liberal narrative, the secular liberal narrative, is there's this denial of divine accountability. When you don't believe in a God or someone that you have to answer to, you feel free to do whatever brings whatever brings you the most happiness and whatever you would like to do, basically indulging in those very primal carnal temptations that we have. And that's why we can run free in society and to say, well, just do you, boo, as long as you're not hurting anybody, go ahead and do what you like. But so that's kind of my understanding. Is also kind of where Islam stands with regards to where we stand as human beings on earth. We're not these separate entities that just kind of roam around and have little social contracts with each other and kind of do our own thing, but we're part of a greater picture and we're part of a divine plan on this earth. So that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, I think Ilham raises a really, really good point, and I think that's one of two ways that Islam's perspective on this issue is just really so different, that we aren't just here to behave how we please. And we know that we have so many injunctions in the Quran that mandate our responsibilities to others in society, and some of them, like, if you look at it today, people would think that that's like, kind of like a trifle. It's really not something important, like the fact that we know that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged us to remove obstacles that harm people, or like stones or rocks or twigs or whatever from the road. You think, what does that actually need like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to tell somebody that? What's arguably the point of it? But ultimately, all of these things that have been mentioned within our tradition create a culture where we're constantly thinking about the rights of other people and trying to help other people, acknowledging that we are not here to just do as we please, and as long as we don't harm someone deliberately, we're okay. We should be actually trying to make life better for everybody. Even the issue of neighbours, for example, is another example. Neighbours have so many rights in Islam, and particularly many of us who live in urban settings in the West, it's an accomplishment if we even know the people who live next door to us. Yet within our tradition, we had scholars debating whether your neighbours constitute 40 houses from your house in each direction. Other scholars have said that, you know, it depends on the custom, it depends on the time that you're in. So I'm not saying we need to like go down 40 houses in every single direction, knock and introduce ourselves. But the point is that, you know, for us, our culture is so different that, you know, if we just know someone's name, we think that that's it. But Islam, your attitude towards your neighbours, knowing them is one part of it, but the care that you should have for them, that you should, you know, visit them when they're sick, you should ask after them, you have to attend their funeral, you should share something with them if you get something new, share some of the blessings of it with them if you get food or any kind of gift. You should, you know, ask them before you perhaps make any alteration to your house or something so as not to inconvenience them. There are so many aspects that are in terms of the rights that your neighbours have of you as a Muslim that we don't even tend to think about, not because we're bad in and of ourselves, because our culture doesn't even make us consider neighbours in the first place. So I would definitely say that that is one of the ways in which Islam really differs to the culture that we're in today. But the second part, I would say, is how Islam valuing communal bonds actually manifests in broader economic and political governance and ethics. There was an interesting article I was reading recently on the World Economic Forum's website that essentially looked at this in terms of how globalization and the emphasis on free markets within the capitalist framework actually contributes to destroying communities. And it focused particularly on the globalization of production networks. And so it gave an example that if an industry or a large corporation decides to relocate their production base from their current country, from their current locale, to a developing country where perhaps labour is cheaper and therefore they'll be able to increase their profit margins, within the capitalist framework, that is viewed as a win for all, because even though it will render thousands of people jobless, those people will then be able to move to other places and get jobs in that same industry, so it allows labour flexibility. Or if that's a dead industry, they'll be able to retrain and do something else, so they're gaining more skills. But it doesn't actually pay attention to the fact that when people move away, and we're talking about people moving en masse, it destroys all of the relationships that have been built within that area over a long period of time, where you traditionally had generations and generations living in the same town, in the same city, and knowing generations within different families and forming those relationships based on trust and mutual history. All of that has now been destroyed by those people moving away, and that's going to take another significant amount of time in order to build those up again. So this is something that the Islamic perspective would view very differently, because community is valued, and attaining the highest profit margin is ultimately a secondary concern if the impacts of those thousands of people becoming jobless and potentially being forced to relocate serves to work against something that Islam also cares about. It's the internalization of those ethics, not as a token addition to a capitalist framework of, oh look, we are an ethical company, but actually being embedded within the thought process that ultimately serves to create the Islamic worldview and consequently the decisions that a theoretical Muslim corporation or Muslim state should make. And I just found that that was a really interesting example of, again, how the culture and the framework and the society that we are living in today does not encourage us to think about community as something that is valued at all, always as a secondary consideration.
I think I'll just jump in and say, you know, obviously I agree with both of what you're saying, and Aisha, mashallah, that was a really interesting point about how it ties into certain economic practices as well. But just going back to what you were saying before about how Islam manifests this a little bit more obviously, I'd say that there are countless examples of how, you know, you can see examples of how important community is in Islam. But for example, I was reading an article about how it says in the Quran, you know, Allah endlessly refers to us or addresses us as Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, Ya ayyuhan nas. And, you know, the Quran was sent down for mankind. It wasn't, you know, okay, yes, obviously we have our own personal individual relationships with Allah in the Quran, but it was a message for mankind. You know, it satisfies what you were saying earlier, Ilhan, about our fitra and our nafs, and how, you know, mankind, human beings are not individual people. You know, we don't just, you know, eat for example, in the animal kingdom, to make a very crude example, we don't eat the young of other human beings, and so we are unable to coexist. Naturally, you put a bunch of humans in the wild and they will, come together and form communities. And the idea that you can exist as an individual without any bearing or thinking on the society in which you live, and there's no regulation or no thought into how to organize and structure these relationships, is asking for trouble. Basically, it's a recipe for the disaster. And that's, I think, what we see more and more in the West with individualism making an upsurgence. We just, you're trying to be your own person and pretending like it has no impact when this is patently untrue. And just going back to Islam and the many beautiful ways in which it emphasizes and really allows us to embrace this communal aspect of our nature. Things like the masajids being this area of community where people come together, not only for the 5 daily prayers, but also Jum'ah, where you come and you listen to a khutbah, and Eid Salah, where it says, even the women who aren't praying, come, bring everyone. All of these instances of where we're encouraged to spend time with each other. Don't let your Muslim brother or sister be alone if they have, for fear of shaitan influencing them or whispering or etc. And, even things like the idea of fard kifaya, of, if there's a whole, area of Islamic jurisprudence where if there is a fard that needs to be fulfilled, for example, knowing how to wash, the dead body for janazah, you are all sinful if you don't know how to do it unless one person learns and takes that duty upon themselves. The fact that there's even in our legislation things that address and necessitate a community, subhanallah, it really has not left anything just for, well, we'll see how this works out, you do you, and see, if it works out, 20 years down the line, if we die out as a species, we'll come to it when it comes, and force people to have children like China is, or Japan. It's just, subhanallah, it's just so night and day, the take on the West, for example, capitalist liberal societies, and how Islam has tried to address these things.
Mm-hmm. Actually, if I can just interject, there's something I mentioned in the article is a quote by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. He's probably, I think, one of my favorite scholars, but I find it really interesting. I added it for this reason. It's links a lot to what you just said there, Aisha. He said that the moral coherence of much of the Sharia can only be understood when we recognize that it presupposes a family model. And it was actually... It was a video link that actually, maybe I'll send it to you guys if you want to share it, but it was part of my research and understanding what the Islamic perspective. And what's interesting is that Sheikh, he continues to elaborate that the demographic of people who have suffered the most from this individualistic culture and from the breakdown of the family unit has actually been women, for the most part. And, nowadays, for example, women are put off by child rearing, and they're put off by stay-at-home mothering, stay-at-home wives and stuff like that. And it's because the idea of being a stay-at-home mother today, or a stay-at-home wife today, is being trapped between four walls with kids screaming their heads off, you know what I mean, with no support or anything like that. And that's why a lot of women are asking, even I have some colleagues, for example, they're gone for mat leave, and they cut their mat leave short because they couldn't cope at home. They needed to get back to work and socialize with people, So traditionally, women used to, and again, not just in the Islamic culture, but even if you look at medieval European and traditional European culture as well, women used to raise their women together. You were not just the mother of your own children, you're the mother of your sister's children, you're the mother of your neighbor's children. And everyone played a part in child rearing, and it created a natural bond of womanhood. It created a bond of motherhood. It created a bond of sisterhood that, to be honest, individualism has killed. It doesn't exist anymore. So I think that's personally what's contributing to the thing. And it's unfortunate. One of the stats I put into the article was that young little girls, I think it was the Good Childhood study, the UK study, little girls have shown that their happiness is directly affected with their family and having a functional family than it is in relation to little boys. Girls have shown more of a need to have a functional family than little boys have. So that's just another interesting point.
It's really interesting that when we look at things like this, it's not always about making individual choices to make sure that, you don't fall prey to the consequences of individualism and breakdown of the family and stuff, but how the structure of the community and the society facilitate these things, whether it is the process of child rearing and whether you have a community to do that. But Aisha, you mentioned the concept of a fard kifaya, right, which is a communal obligation, which is, just like evidence enough of how Islam conceptualizes community and like the individual's roles in it, and how that, it's like stipulated in the Sharia and everything. But thinking about how I think it applies in a certain way to those of us who live as minorities in like non-Muslim majority countries, how when it comes to establishing a fard kifaya, there's no regulating body that, first of all, like what constitutes the community, like the ummah here. There's no like institutions that are regulating whether like the fard kifaya is being fulfilled by the community. And there's not really, it's difficult to even, because there aren't those institutions that help us work as a community. We also, it's very easy to like live your life as a Muslim here and just like your Islam is like your individual ibadah, and like whether or not, like, I'm not even gonna get into the whole debate of like Muslims participating like in the state and in politics like in non-Muslim countries, but that it's not the same as like it's very easy for a Muslim to just be like, oh yeah, like participating in that stuff or like just like local social political institutions is not really like my role, or there's not like really place for me to like play a role in that. It's even more conducive to just becoming very individualistic, very isolated from society. But then even I think in the Muslim world where there isn't like, where people have, are living under like oftentimes just like secular nation state systems, there aren't these like institutions, whether it's like proper Sharia courts or other things that regulate, the fard kifaya, that give people like a real solid tangible conception of community. So, and not to say that, like, that there is no room for individual choice, that like, oh, we're just subject to these systems and you can't do anything, like we are subject to them, but individuals also have like a role to play in like changing them, just like even what you do within your own household, how you interact with people. But there's, I think that like, if we don't acknowledge the role of like state institutions, and just like, like regulating bodies for helping to like mitigate and like solve this issue, that we'll never be able to like really address it comprehensively.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna go, because obviously, like you said, this is a whole other discussion that we could have like endless hours of commentary on. But I think you raise a really, really massive point in that we can't, none of the things that I think we're talking about are sort of, these are like tips and tricks to how to avoid the, pitfalls of, individualism and how not to die alone in hospital. It's not, or, alternatively, how to become a better Muslim and make sure you're doing all of these XYZ things and then you will be, A-okay. It is a much wider, broader, like this issue is in the broader context of a societal issue. Community by definition. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to, or what I'm trying to hope, or what we're all trying to, allude to, is this is a bigger problem. It's not, I mean, that's where the problem stems from in the first place. Like this, thinking of it as an individual problem is you're already doing it wrong. You've got to think of it on the bigger scale and the bigger picture of society, of a state level sort of, the problems are coming from the top. You're not going to fix this by, grassroots organizations, I'm not saying there's anything like, oh, it's not going to do anything, don't try, but I'm saying that unless we do live in a complete Islamic framework which does account for all of these things, like, Aisha H was saying also about how, economics also plays a role, or it so is affected by these things as well. They're so inextricably linked. To think that you as an individual can fix it without there being like a statewide implementation of it or something wider and greater is, I think, simplifying things.
I think it's important for us as Muslims, like you said, when we're looking at it as just an individual issue, and not recognizing that it's at a larger scale, like at a micro, and it's not at a micro level. We have to look at a macro level, and we need to start looking into our community. The thing is us Muslims, we like to talk a lot, but unfortunately we don't like to do the work a lot, and it's very evident. Twitter Exhibit A, you know what I mean? So I think what we really need to do is see it from the individual perspective that we should see it as, is seeing what state you are as a Muslim in your faith and what foundations you have built within the Islamic frameworks. do you have basic understanding of your aqidah? Like, this sounds so basic, but you really have to go and study your aqidah again. You have to go back to your fiqh. You have to build that foundation. And it's unfortunate, but like I mentioned, the secular liberal framework, it's compounding with a crisis of faith amongst Muslims. And for the most part, it's gone unnoticed. And that's the issue. We've imbibed this paradigm that's, again, foreign to our religion. And at the same time, when we have parties within our ummah and external from our ummah that are telling us, assess Islam, not necessarily assess Islam from in relation to these foreign and these other paradigms and these other worldviews, and whatever is congruent with these worldviews, then accepted, and anything part of Islam that's not congruent with these worldviews, and you have to put it aside, which goes against the very nature of Islam. Islam itself is submitted to. Islam isn't, Islam doesn't submit. And I think that's a very hard pill for a lot of Muslims to swallow, because it gives them a visceral reaction to their religion. So I think what's really important is understanding that there are groups of people within our communities, like I said, within the ummah and external to the ummah, who something like that makes them, they're very uneasy about Islam, and they're very uneasy about Muslims sort of looking into the religion and speaking so openly like we are about the Sharia, and not having any issues with looking into the Sharia and studying it from not only from a religious but from an academic and social standpoint. And there is I'll be very honest, there is a concerted effort to demonize and marginalize the Muslim world for that reason, because Islam doesn't have that very easygoing sort of just go with the times, go with popular culture aspect to it. But it's Allah's promise that He will preserve Islam with or without us, and I think that's a wake-up call for us, that if we don't fulfill our obligations as Muslims to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to not just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to humankind in general, we have not only responsibility to other Muslims, we have a responsibility to all of God's creation. And if we don't fulfill that obligation, then God could very well replace us in the manner in which He pleases. So I think we're standing at a crossroads right now. And I think in order for us to fulfill these obligations, we have to know what they are, and we need to go back to the foundations of our religion. It's imperative that we learn the Fard Ayn. It's imperative that we learn what, as a Muslim individual, you are responsible for and what you are accountable for. And that includes like your immediate circles, your family, your community. Going back and don't spend so much time yelling about marriage and polygamy and all these things and feminism on the internet. Go and look into your community. What way can you volunteer in your community? Go to your masajid. What can you do to help your community? And shut off your app for a little bit if you have to, but this is not getting us anywhere. These discussions online, really, I'll be very frank with you, are not going to get us anywhere. It's the action, it's the amal that's going to get us somewhere.
Yeah, God bless you. Honestly, that was first of all, a really good way to kind of wrap up this whole discussion, and also to just re-emphasize that there is a individual imperative to work for, and to not become either pessimistic about systemic issues, but also again to understand Islam as not just our ibadat and things that some maybe we study the tradition as this historical academic phenomenon, but to really see it as a source of real solutions, and that's where we'll get the most comprehensive solutions for the society and the dunya that Allah created. But to shift gears, because we are coming a couple weeks off of Ramadan, which incidentally is also one of those times where we remember the meaning and the experience of community. First of all, late Ramadan and Eid Mubarak to folks listening. I hope it was a fulfilling time for all of you. But I want to ask you guys, because, and we always hear about how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they would spend, the 6 months before Ramadan asking Allah, Allahumma balighna Ramadan, Allah, allow us to see Ramadan, and praying for that. And then the other half of the year after Ramadan, praying that Allah accepts what we did in Ramadan, because there's, performing the deed, and then there's actual, whether or not it's accepted is, up to Allah. So I wanted to ask y'all, what do you think are just good ways to maintain practice, or just what mindset to have, what things to do in the follow-up to Ramadan, so that we don't lose whatever momentum that we did gain, and how do we maintain how do we maintain that momentum throughout the year?
that's the $1 million question, isn't it? How can we make every day like Ramadan? SubhanAllah, I think that, everybody will have goals that they wanted to achieve in Ramadan or things that they want to carry on afterwards. But I think that obviously we should try and keep up with some of the bigger things, like doing the sunnah fasts or praying tahajjud, or whatever it may be. But I think that sometimes we can overlook the little things that really add to our spirituality and really nourish our soul. And one of the most important aspects in that regard is dhikr. And subhanAllah, dhikr is just like one of the easiest things to do, because you don't need to take a set time out of your day for it. You don't need to wake up for suhoor, you don't need to wake up in the night. You can just do it wherever you are, whatever setting. You can do it quietly, you can do it loudly. It's just really the easiest way to accumulate all of those rewards and remind yourself of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately, Ramadan is about connecting to Allah, not just performing sort of ritual acts of ibadah. And so dhikr works twofold, in that it's a physical action, but at the same time it makes you think. And there are so many things that you can do dhikr of. Allah's 99 names are sort of the most obvious one, and I think Brother Muhammad Ghailan has a great series on Instagram at the moment looking at the various names of Allah and really trying to understand their meanings, and how we should, and that again contributes to us developing our relationship with Allah and knowing Him. So I think for me that would be something, that would be my tip, just to sort of focus on the little things, and one of those little things being dhikr, inshallah.
I was gonna say, for me, I think Ramadan, because it's a month, it's almost like, obviously I'm only speaking for myself here, but it's almost like a marathon. You've got this 30 days to fast, and you're going to be on your best behavior, and you're going to try to do every single amazing deed that you can during this month. And then Eid comes and you eat this massive feast and you see all your friends and the shaitan is released and everything goes a bit crazy. But I think so one thing that's really helped me is, for those of you who don't know about, fasting the 6 days of Shawwal, and that it's sort of like it's helped me in that A, I've remembered to fast Shawwal this year, but B, also because just that sensation of feeling hungry, and when I'm fasting and like knowing that I'm fasting, it almost allows me to trick myself that it is still Ramadan, and then it's easier in a way for me to continue some of the things that I was doing during Ramadan. Another thing I'd recommend is maybe, so for example, if during Ramadan you started reading like 10 pages, 5 pages after every salah, maybe, I know, it might not be feasible right now, especially if you took time off work, for example, or if you was during some holidays, but maybe try at least do 1 page or do something. So even if it's like continue one of the habits from Ramadan, even if it wasn't to the same like magnitude that you did it then, do it on a smaller scale, but do something. So like Aisha was saying, just continue the small things, or just continue some of the good habits you managed to pick up during the month.
SubhanAllah, there's one hadith that one of my teachers shared with me. It's a hadith Qudsi, and I feel like when it comes, she mentioned it in the context of the end of Ramadan as well, and just with regards to moving on after that, because we spend so much time really grinding down and bringing it down to like pinpointing where our issues are with our relationship with Allah, and really smoothing out the fine points and things like that. But she mentioned the hadith Qudsi where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that the most beloved thing which my slave comes nearer to me or draws closest to me is that which I have enjoined upon him, like as what I have made obligatory to him. And then my slave keeps drawing closer to me through performing the nawafil, the extra stuff, until I love him. So subhanAllah, it's almost like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the blueprint. He's given us the map, exactly how He wants us to get to Him, and basically how to get to the point where God loves you. And then the hadith continues to say, when I love Him, He becomes the hearing with which He hears, and the seeing with which He sees, and the hand with which He strikes, and the legs with which He walks. And if He asks anything of me, I will give it to Him. If He asks for my protection, I will protect Him. So subhanAllah, all of that, a person who's walking and Allah becomes, not, obviously this isn't astaghfirullah, this isn't some sort of anthropomorphism or anything. It's somebody, just gotta say, I have to say the disclaimer right there, but, it's not somebody who's like, who's you know, the eye, when God becomes, quote unquote, becomes the eye with which they see or the hand with which they strike. It obviously isn't literal. It's somebody who's walking on this earth who is aligned with divine order, who's in line with the heavenly order. And all of that comes from, and that's like, subhanAllah, that's a maqam that we're all trying to reach. That's a station we're trying to reach. But it all comes back to what God said. He said, what I have enjoined upon him, what I've started as obligatory. So your 5 prayers, your adhkar, like Aisha said, you know, fasting, like Aisha said as well. You know, just it's really about the consistent actions, bringing it back to the basics. We often complicate things a lot more than they need to be complicated when God and his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have made it very clear for us.
Yeah, definitely. And to add, I don't want to like, because I agree with everything that you guys have said, and I don't want to be repetitive, but to add like a couple other things. One is that like we know that outside of Ramadan, it's, at least during Ramadan, for me this was like, I don't know, it felt like potentially my last Ramadan where I'm like free for summer, don't have like, I'm not working, not in school or anything, so I can spend my whole day just like focusing on ibadah and like reading and like staying up all night and stuff, but outside of Ramadan, like that's, you know, obviously way more difficult, especially when work or school starts or like whatever else people are busy with, but I think like there can just through like a mindset shift, understanding that like if you like orient your intention for something, whether it is work or whether it's just like, honestly, even the way you drive, like I'm gonna drive like a nice person on the street today and I'm gonna like, you know, like be gas efficient or whatever. If you do it for like the sake of Allah, that becomes a form of ibadah, you know? Yeah. So I think like reorienting and focusing on the intention, like everything can become like you know, a form of ibadah. So even outside of Ramadan, like your 24 hours can be full of ibadah, even if it like externally it looks like any other working person's day. But aside from that, also just on like the lesson from like fasting itself, I think is that and it's not a coincidence that Ramadan is the month we fast and it's also the month of the Quran. Like those aren't just like two like coincidentally unrelated things that both happen during Ramadan, but the lesson in that is that when your material desires are fulfilled, it like impairs your ability to reflect on the message of the Quran and to like have taqwa, you know, and it pushes you into heedlessness, and like obviously like there are scholars who've like written on that much more eloquently than I can reproduce right now, but even outside of Ramadan, like whether it is like through actually fasting or just like reducing food intake in general, like that's something that I'm trying to focus on, is just like eating less and like not like sleeping too much, like unnecessarily, not being lazy, but yeah, trying to like minimize and even material consumption in general, whether it's like clothing or anything else. But yeah, I think with that we're gonna wrap up this episode. I really want to thank you, Ilham, for joining us and being our first honored guest. This was honestly just like a really fantastic conversation, and it's cool to also be able to like meet your Twitter mutuals. So that's awesome.
I feel like Aisha is really missing out on all the Twitter references. Dude, do you feel left out, Aisha?
Listen, I tried Twitter. It was bad for my nerves. I stepped back, and I'm not gonna.
I respect that.
Don't regret that.
Dang.
I respect that. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the pleasure was all mine, ladies. It was great, honestly.
Jazakallah khair for joining us.
Please keep up, you know, the work that you're doing. Please keep me and my family in your du'as, inshallah. Course, yeah. You know, I'm always supporting you guys, and I'll always keep you guys in my du'as as well.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Absolutely. I want to like ask our audience to also like make du'a for you and for like Qurtuba Online to like ask Allah to like give you tawfiq with the project. And also your friend that you mentioned earlier who like passed away and was like your inspiration for starting Qurtuba Online, may Allah have mercy on her, and may he also like give her the reward for the things that like you're doing with Qurtuba Online. So yeah, we're asking everybody to like keep us in your du'as, and if you have thoughts on like anything we discussed today, please hit us up on social media and join the conversation. And we hope that Allah accepts everybody's Ramadan, that He allows us to maintain this the ibadah and the momentum after the month is over. And again, reminder for the project that we mentioned in the beginning, to donate if you can for emergency medical aid for Sudan, and also to keep them in your dua to pray for them. And with that, Thank you all for listening, and thank you all for joining me in this conversation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.